Over the weekend, I issued an emergency license to allow Billy Caldwell's medical team to access cannabis-based medicine to treat life-threatening seizures caused by a severe form of epilepsy. This was an emergency procedure which was led by a senior clinician with the support of the medical director at the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital. I'm pleased to say that Billy has now been discharged from hospital. It is now for his senior clinicians to develop a long-term care plan. I'm sure the whole House would like to join me in expressing the sympathy of all of us for Billy and his family for what they have been going through, the very difficult time that they have faced. The course of action in this case was, of course, unprecedented. There is strong scientific evidence that cannabis is a drug which can harm people's mental and physical health and damage communities. There are currently no legally recognized medicinal or therapeutic benefits. To date, under successive governments, Home Office policy has been to permit the production, supply and possession of raw cannabis solely for the purposes of research with a Home Office license. The cannabis-based medicine Sativex can, however, be prescribed in the UK because there is a proven case for its safety and its efficacy. However, cases like Billy's, Alfie Dingley's and others like it have shown that we now need to look more closely at the use of cannabis-based medicines in the healthcare sector in the UK. Because it has become clear to me since becoming Home Secretary that the position that we find ourselves in currently is not satisfactory. It's not satisfactory for the parents, it's not satisfactory for the doctors, and it's not satisfactory for me. I've now come to the conclusion that it is time to review the scheduling of cannabis. Before I go into any detail in the review, let me be absolutely clear that this step is in no way a first step to the legalization of cannabis for recreational use. This government has absolutely no plans to legalize cannabis, and the penalties for unauthorized supply and possession will remain unchanged. We will not see a dangerous president or weaken our ability to keep dangerous drugs off our streets. The approach that we will be asking the review to consider will be no different than that has been used before for controlled drugs where there is evidence of medical benefits. The government review will take place in two parts. Part one of the Commission will consider the evidence available for the medicinal and therapeutic benefits of cannabis-based medicines. Professor Sally Davies, who also serves as the Chief Medical Officer, will take this part forward. This would then inform exactly which forms of cannabis or cannabis-based medicines should be taken forward in Part 2. Part 2 will be led by the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs. The ACMD will not reassess the evidence issued by Professor Sally Davies, but will provide an assessment based on the balance of harms and public health needs of what, if anything, should be rescheduled. If the review identified that there are significant medical benefits, then we do intend to reschedule. We have seen in recent months that there is a pressing need to allow those who might benefit from cannabis-based products to access them. It will, of course, take time for Sally Davies and ACMD to complete their work and for the government to consider their recommendations. In the short term, the Policing Minister announced yesterday that the government will be establishing an expert panel of clinicians to advise ministers of any applications to prescribe cannabis-based medicines. This is intended to ensure that advice to ministers on licensing in these cases is clinically led, that it is based firmly on medical evidence, and that it is as swift as possible. The Chief Medical Officers across the UK have been actively working together already on this panel, and the expert panel will start considering applications within a week. Mr. Speaker, earlier today, the Policing Minister also spoke to Alfie Dingley's mum, Hannah Deacon, and informed her that we will issue a licence for Alfie later today. All of the work that I have outlined today is about making sure that we keep in step with the latest scientific evidence and that patients and their families have access to the most appropriate course of medical treatment. And I would like to pay tribute to the Policing Minister for all his excellent and sustained work on this important issue. As a father, I know there is nothing worse than seeing your child suffer. You would do anything to take away their pain. That is why I have the utmost sympathy for Billy Caldwell, Alfie Dingley, and many others like them, and for their parents who have been under unimaginable stress and strain. I know that they are following a gut parental instinct to do whatever is in their power to try and alleviate the suffering of their child. And today, I would like to say to this House that I will do everything in my power to make sure that we have a system that works, so that these children and these parents can get access to the best possible medical treatment. I commend this statement to the House.
Diane Abbott.
Long word.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Home Secretary for a prior sight of his statement. Let me begin by saying I'm well aware of the damage cannabis consumption can cause, whether it's the health of very young consumers, whether it's issues to do with ganja psychosis, and there's also the fact that the newer forms of cannabis, notably skunk, are very much stronger than the cannabis available a generation ago. However, I'm also aware, as the Home Secretary will be, that it was a former chairman of the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs, Professor Nutt, who said that cannabis is actually less harmful than alcohol. And I note that Baron Haig of Richmond is calling for complete decriminalisation. But on this side of the House, we welcome the Home Secretary's statement that he's going to look more closely at the use of cannabis-based medication in healthcare in the UK. We agree that this is the right time, if not long overdue, to review the scheduling of cannabis. And we are very glad to hear that the policing minister has spoken or will speak to Alfie Dingley's mother after the meeting in 10 Downing Street. We were aware that she was very concerned about the length of time it was taken to issue a suitable licence. I would like to ask the Home Secretary, he has released some of the supply of medication that Billy Caldwell's mother brought into the country, but is he going to release the complete supply? I would like to ask the Home Secretary, is he aware of the concern of the delays in the current process? And whilst we welcome the review, something must be done to manage the current process more effectively, including the use of an advisory panel. But something must be done, because it's simply not acceptable that parents and families should have to suffer as they have been suffering because of these interminable delays in agreeing these licenses. Cannabis and the drug issue generally are big issues of concern for the community. It's important that we base whatever we do on scientific fact. It's important that we base whatever we do in evidence, not just bowing to what might be popular sentiment. On the one hand, there are harms connected with cannabis consumption, but on the other hand, it is time to move forward and examine and establish once and for all what are the possibilities of cannabis-based medicine to alleviate pain and suffering.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, can I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her comments and her support for the statement. I think she agrees with me that it is absolutely the right time for the government to look at this issue. She will be aware that under successive governments, policy in this area has not changed for a long time. But given what we have all seen all too clearly through our TV screens, on the radio, through meetings, and the policing minister has had many with their families affected, that is absolutely the right time that we look at this and we act as quickly as possible. And in acting, there are two parts to that, and I'd like to reassure the House. I think all members of the House will appreciate that rules of this type cannot be changed overnight. They have to be based on evidence. And one of the issues that will always arise if they are not based on evidence and not properly done, there are some people out there that may have different views and may try to legally challenge them, and so they have to be robust enough. So that's why we've put in place this process, and we wanted to act as quickly as possible. I can also say that that Professor Sajid Javid has said that she believes that her office has said that she can complete her work within a week. So we are moving as fast as we possibly can, and then I hope the ACMD can act within weeks as well. At the same time, though, of course, we don't want any other family to suffer, and so we want to make sure that we have a process in place to act much more quickly, much more swiftly, and that's why we've established this expert panel. There are chief medical officers involved from all the devolved nations in that, so we coordinate and we work well together, including, of course, Northern Ireland. And I think that expert panel will certainly be able to act very quickly and very swiftly, and ministers will be able to take action very quickly based on medical advice, which is what we would all want to see, it all based on medical advice. The Right Honourable Lady asked me about Alfie Dingley. As I mentioned, we will be issuing the licence today. Alfie Dingley's mother has already been informed. Of course, she's very happy with that decision. I am sorry that she's had to wait so long and she's had to go through all the distress that she's faced. I'm grateful to the policing minister for all the work that he's done, and also to her Member of Parliament, the Right Honourable Member for Rugby and Kenilworth, for all the work that he has done. In the case of Billy Caldwell, the Right Honourable Lady asked me about his situation. Of course, we will ensure we're working very closely with the family. We'll ensure that now the licence has been issued, that the right amount of medicine for the right time is available. It does depend somewhat on whether Billy Caldwell's mother decides to go back to Northern Ireland or not, because it is an entirely devolved matter in terms of licensing, but we are working very closely with the Northern Ireland authorities to make sure if she just decides to go that it's seamless and it doesn't affect Billy Caldwell in any way. And for the Right Honourable Lady's interest in terms of how quickly we acted, the first time we received a request from a clinician in case of Billy Caldwell was around 11:15 p.m. on Friday just gone, and by noon I'd issued a licence and the drug was in possession of the family, and I don't believe we could have acted any more quickly from the point we received a request from her clinician. And once again, let me just say I really appreciate what the Right Honourable Lady has said, because I think by working together that we can make sure that all these families that have been suffering, that we can bring that suffering to an end and help in every way that we can.
Crispin Blunt.
Can I thank my honourable friend for this statement and the rapid way in which he has gripped this issue. And on behalf of the, as co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Drug Policy Reform, this is a very welcome step forward. There is a substantial amount of medical evidence out there already. There's a 2016 paper commissioned by my predecessors as co-chairs of the All-Party Group on this issue by Professor Mike Barnes, who I know has been associated with the Alfie Dingley case. But could my honourable friend make clear that Professor Sally Davis has been given two tasks here, one on the expert panel to advise on immediate applications for licences, and could he confirm that people will not be asked to pay the swinging fees that were being asked to the Dingley family in respect of their licences? And secondly, what is the timescale he expects of the second part of the second task that he's asked the Chief Medical Officer to undertake?
Can I, first of all, welcome my honourable friend for the comments that he's made, but also the work that he's done in this area over a number of years and the interest that he takes. And I can confirm to him that Professor Sally Davies is helping first with the expert panel so that we can bring help before the review is complete, and then of course with the review itself. And he's mentioned also the very important issue of fees, and that is something else that I'm looking at to see how we can help.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Home Secretary for his statement. Could I just gently say to him it would be nice in future if the third party could have a little bit more advance notice than it literally being handed into my hand as he gets to his feet. But that said, I am pleased about this statement, and I think the Home Secretary is making some significant progress here, and I'm particularly pleased for the individual families concerned, and pleased to read about the review. But of course, there are thousands of people across the United Kingdom who want to access these medicines for the treatment of conditions for which there is evidence they can alleviate the symptoms and pain. And what these individuals and their families are worried about is the bureaucracy and the hurdles that have to be crossed to get access. So can he give me some assurance that his review will be focused towards looking at removing bureaucracy and hurdles? Does he agree with me that eventually this matter should be seen as a public health matter and taken out of the Home Office and into health departments across the UK? But in the meantime, I'm pleased to hear that the chief medical officers of the devolved countries are involved. But can he confirm to me what other liaison there is with the Scottish Government, for example, in relation to whom both health and policing, which was mentioned, are devolved matters?
Can I thank the Honourable Lady for her comments? And she talks about thousands of people that are potentially suffering, and she's right to mention that and to highlight that. And it's no one knows the exact number, but it's estimated there are at least 10,000 children in the UK that have a drug-resistant form of epilepsy, and I think it really puts it into focus just what a big difference these measures can make. I can also give her the assurance about bureaucracy and hurdles. I mean, frankly, there has been a lot of bureaucracy and hurdles in the way up until now. The decision that we made on Friday was unprecedented. And also the measures that we're putting in place. And I believe that with the expert panel will make a huge difference. The whole purpose of that is to make it as smooth and as quick as possible, based on medical advice at all points. And I don't want to prejudge the review, but I'm sure the Honourable Lady can sense the sense of direction.
Craig McKinley. Of the all-party parliamentary group Cannabis, harmful effects on developing brains. Can I thank my right honourable friend for his assurances that any future medicinal use of cannabis won't be conflated with any weakening of the government's position on recreational use. Is he aware of the increasingly clear evidence of permanent psychosis and depression amongst young people who are users of what we see on our streets more regularly, and that is of skunk cannabis?
No, I am very much aware of that, and it's perfectly correct for my honourable friend to highlight this point. And as I've made clear in the statement, I'm happy to make absolutely clear again, there are no plans at all to decriminalise cannabis. It is a controlled Class B drug under the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971, and that will not change.
Cooper.
Look, all of us must want children and also adults to get the medical treatment they need without additional hurdles that have nothing to do with medicine. And I welcome his announcement he will look at the scheduling, because it is extremely hard to explain the scheduling classification of cannabis compared to opiates and the additional burdens that it poses for the health service if those products are needed for treatment. But could I also ask him again to look more widely in his review at the barriers and obstacles and look at whether these kinds of scheduling or licensing decisions should be passed to the Department of Health, and whether a lot more drugs policy should in fact be led by the Health Department.
Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Lady makes a number of good points, and she's right also to highlight that there are currently drugs that are under Schedule 2. So the medical benefits are accepted, but used the wrong way, they can be a lot more harmful than other drugs. So she's right to highlight that. She mentioned about the Department of Health and the role of that department in these kinds of decisions. I think this does require a cross-government approach, and the Home Office and the Department of Health, as we've seen, you're working closely together, because you do have this issue of drugs that are illegal, so they're categorised as illegal drugs in the Misuse of Drugs Act, but also to recognise where appropriate there are medicinal benefits to some of those drugs, as has already been recognised, for example, with cocaine and morphine. So I think it's appropriate that the two departments work together.
Richard Drax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I absolutely understand the government's review of this policy, and I welcome it for those who suffer and need this drug to make them better. But may I just say from my own life experience that drugs, and I'm delighted the government are not going to decriminalise the use of drugs, because all too often people start on cannabis end on something far worse. And I've seen personally the devastation to families and the loss of children because of drugs.
Mr. Speaker, I agree wholeheartedly with my honourable friend.
Antonia Antoniazzi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to welcome the move that the Home Secretary has made today on behalf of my constituents. But what is really important for me is that the grandfather of Charlie Jones and the parents of Jace Newton-Seeley want to know how they will go about applying for a licence, and will that be made clear by the Home Secretary and the Department so that people know the process to access it?
Yes, I can tell the Honourable Lady I think there is a need to make the process clearer, but also, as I've been quite open about, I don't think the current process is a friendly process at all. It doesn't, I mean, up until the decision that was made in the case of Billy Caldwell, it was unprecedented. No government in the past had recognised the medicinal benefits of cannabis by making such a decision, by issuing a licence. So we do need to make the process, even in the interim process, through the expert panel, much more smooth and straightforward, and we will be setting out, once that panel set up, as I said, by next week, exactly how that can work for her constituents and others.
Desmond Swain.
Clinical leadership may have its place, but for years the crying need has been for political leadership. So can I thank him and the police minister for providing it?
We both thank our honourable friend, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Norman Lamb.
Can I genuinely welcome this announcement, which does mark a significant shift, but isn't there a dreadful hypocrisy in government policy on drugs more generally? Probably most of the Cabinet drinks alcohol, the most dangerous drug of all. Probably half of the Cabinet has used cannabis, possibly even the Home Secretary, unless they're a group of very odd people. Perhaps that's the case. Shouldn't the Home Secretary actually follow the advice of the former Conservative leader, Lord Hague, who makes the case for a regulated, legalised market, and that is the best way to protect people from harm, who at the moment buy from criminals who have no interest in their welfare at all?
Mr. Speaker, this is about making sure that we have the best possible medical treatment available for everyone in the UK, but especially our children. That's what this is about. It's about medical treatment. It is not about the recreational use of drugs, which can cause severe damage to people. So I'm afraid I don't agree with the Right Honourable Gentleman on that point, and on this occasion, I do not agree with Lord Hague.
Simon Hoare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank my right honourable friend for very much humanising this issue. As chairman of the all-party group on multiple sclerosis, can I welcome his announcement about the medical side of cannabis, and can I offer the services of the MS Society in any inquiry and call for evidence which he may have. Can I also associate myself with the remark, I am frankly staggered with my noble friend the Lord Hague, and indeed anybody else. Those of us we all represent constituencies where we will have seen at first hand the devastation that cannabis causes. It's not recreational use, it steals lives and futures, and we must be robust in ensuring that it stops.
Mr. Speaker, of course, my honourable friend is absolutely right on that point, and with regards to those that have MS, he will know that Sativex, which has a cannabis base, is something that's already licensed, but today is about how we can improve on the medical use of cannabis even further.
And Caroline Lucas.
I genuinely welcome as well the licence for Alfie today, but what a scandal that it's taken 3 months since Hannah Deacon met with the Prime Minister and was promised swift and compassionate action. What an outrage that frankly it's only the press attention that has finally shamed this government into action. And when it comes to the expert panel, what assurance can he give that there will be enough Home Office staff to deal with potentially thousands of applications that might well come now?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady, I just say gently to her, in the case of Alfie Dingley, of course we're all pleased that we've been able to issue the licence today, but she should know before that application, her approach by the clinicians, by his clinicians, is that no government in the past, because of cannabis' scheduling, is classed as a Schedule 1 drug, had even entertained the idea of looking at this as from a medical point of view. This government has done that, and I hope that she can join us in not just welcoming that, but also working together about how we can end the suffering of so many other children in particular that could benefit from these kinds of medicines.
Philip Holloway.
The Home Secretary for his statement. I support the legalisation of cannabis for medical use. And could I urge the Home Secretary to encourage the clinical review team to get on with it? There is already a mass of internationally accredited research available which they can draw on. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. The research is there. It just needs to be studied and a decision made quickly.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend makes a very good point. One of the issues has been, I think, that our rules in this area has not kept up with medical research and evidence. There's at least 13 European countries that have recognised the medicinal benefits of cannabis, as well as Canada, over 30 US states. And also the World Health Organization has done work on this and pointed to evidence. So we will be using and drawing on all that evidence. That's why I'm pleased that Professor Sally Davies has said that she can complete her work in days.
Diana Johnson.
Thank you. The Home Secretary says he wants a system that works. I'm a bit concerned about the role of the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs in light of what's happened in recent days. Are they still fit for purpose?
Good question.
Yes, they are, because they have an important role to play, which is to advise ministers on the scheduling of drugs, and if we are to change the schedule, it is important to listen to their point of view.
Michael Tomlinson.
Welcome the fact that the Home Secretary set out at the start of his statement that cannabis is a drug which can harm people's mental and physical health and damage communities. I also welcome the fact that any change will be science-led. Will my right honourable friend also look at international examples? He mentions Canada. The law was very recently introduced there. Will he see what works and, importantly, what isn't working with that law in particular? Because the evidence there is mixed.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right. We will certainly be looking at international evidence, and for the UK, since the current rules were put in place, a lot has changed, and we'll be taking all that into account.
Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome what the Home Secretary said today. I've long supported decriminalisation of medicinal purposes of the use of cannabis, not least from having heard some really heartbreaking stories from my own constituents in Cardiff South and Penarth, particularly those with degenerative conditions, some of whom sadly passed away unable to get the pain relief and support that they needed. But can I ask, given the speed at which this review is going to be undertaken at, will the Home Secretary and the Police Minister, indeed the Attorney General, be giving any guidance to police forces or indeed the CPS on the national or the public interest of pursuing indictments of material or prosecuting individuals who are using it for medicinal purposes in the interim?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the current rules are clear, and what we have discussed today and debated in Parliament is how we would like to see a change in that process. But until those rules change, they would have to be applied. But the honourable gentleman raises a perfectly good point about working with law enforcement and making sure that they are taking emerging policy into account.
Henry Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've long advocated the use of medical cannabis, and therefore I very much welcome the Home Secretary's announcement of a review today. Can I have assurances that that review will be very much patient-centre-led, in other words, using the evidence of how the use of medical cannabis can help patients with chronic conditions?
Mr. Speaker, I can absolutely give that reassurance to my honourable friend that the evidence that needs to be looked at must have the patient at its very heart, and it must be driven by the medical evidence.
Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the statement, and particularly the news on Alfie Dingley? Of course, there's already evidence of the medical benefits of cannabis, otherwise Sativex would not be available on licence, which is why it's so absurd that cannabis is still a controlled drug in Schedule 1. So I would be hopeful and confident that the review will lead to a recommendation to reschedule. So can the Secretary of State confirm that a rescheduling can be carried out quite quickly and easily by means of a statutory instrument, and we can get on with this?
First, I'd point out to the honourable gentleman that in the case of Sativex, it was for a particular condition it was looked at, and that's right that the drugs are looked at in the context of the condition they are trying to help with. But he makes a good wider point that once the review is complete, can we get on with it, and if changes are going to be made, and make them quickly, and that's exactly what I intend to do.
David Duquet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the chairman of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for 22Q11.2 deletion syndrome, I know many parents of children with a rare genetic condition which often goes undiagnosed, and when diagnosed is not always appropriately treated. So I'm sure that I know from that experience, I'm sure that Billy's family welcome the statement made today. But can I also welcome the fact that the elements of this statement that shows that this is a government which looks to the evidence and responds to the public interest as well as the patient at the forefront?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right that the process should absolutely be clinically led, and we should listen to the evidence from the clinicians, drawing on international evidence too, and that's exactly what should feed into the outcome of this review.
Patrick Grady.
I think we all welcome the progress that's being made, but there are questions about people who need help now. I have constituents, Laura Murray and John Ahern, whose one-year-old daughter, Blanade, was diagnosed with Ikari syndrome. She suffers very severe seizures throughout the day, and they believe that these medicines could help. So I'll write to him with more details of the specific situation, but I would like to ask him, how much discretion does he still have, and how much is he willing to exercise?
Hear, hear.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the rules currently stand, that until the review is complete and changes are made, is that any use of cannabis for medicinal purposes will require a Home Office licence, or in the case of Northern Ireland, from the Health Department in Northern Ireland. And I hope what I've set out today has given reassurance that I do recognise there needs to be action now, not tomorrow or in a few weeks' time, a few months' time, action now, and that's what the purpose of the expert panel is, to make that a much smoother, clinically led and a much quicker process.
Kevin Jones.
Can I welcome the Home Secretary's announcement today, and do note that he's not going to reclassify cannabis. But can I ask him to look at how we deal with individuals in possession of small amounts of cannabis? And to that end, can I ask him to look at Checkpoint, an initiative from Durham Police, which is an alternative justice system which aims to help the individuals and try and break the link between drugs and crime?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Gentleman is right. This is not about the reclassification of cannabis. He makes an important point about law enforcement and making sure that it also works with others. And there are many good groups out there to try to get people off drugs once they have a problem. And I think it's important to do more work on that.
Stuart C. MacDonald.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Secretary of State's announcement. Those treating my constituent Caroline are firmly of the view that she's alive and living a good quality of life today because her brain tumour has been slowed by regular use of cannabis oil, but she's having to import that at a cost of hundreds of pounds every month. When can she expect her doctors to be able to prescribe that treatment, and is there anything that she should be doing in the meantime in order to benefit from what the Secretary of State has said today?
Mr. Speaker, I don't know all the details on that case, but certainly it might be good to look at the work of the expert panel that I've talked about. And as I say, we'll be setting out more details on that as well. But in terms of any changes to the rules being made, they will come after the review. And as the House has heard, we are trying to do that as quickly as possible.
Mr. Graham Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The mainstream media have highlighted the cases this week of Alfie Dingley and Billy Caldwell, and heartbreaking cases they are too. And the Secretary of State himself said there are 10,000 children, he estimates, who suffer seizures in the UK who potentially could benefit, and many, many more people suffering from degenerative conditions. It's always been the case that he could grant a specific licence, but in terms of his earlier comments about the timescale that the ACMD will take to reach a conclusion, looking at those international evidences, you know, from Canada and the 13 EU countries, what's his estimate of the time frame before we can get a more streamlined system?
Mr. Speaker, but first of all, I'd like to reassure the honourable gentleman that we will absolutely be taking into account the international evidence, and I certainly expect, I know that Dame Sally Davies will look at that too, as will the ACMD. And but I do want to make sure that, obviously, I want that work to be done as soon as possible. But right now, I want to streamline the process, and that means the work of the expert panels can be very important.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also would like to welcome the Home Secretary's statement today. It will be particularly welcomed by my constituent, the Gray family, who suffer from a very similar condition to both Alfie Dingley and Billy Cresswell. And to thank him, and also for the speed with which he is going to act, but urge him not to be thrown off track and allow anything to affect the rescheduling of cannabis, any kind of reactionary fear about the availability of cannabis for recreational use, that this is not in any way diverts him from his cause.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Honourable Lady for her comments, and can I reassure her that I will not be thrown off track?
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I first of all thank the Minister very much for his response today and for the urgency that he's given. Can I also thank the Minister, the Honourable Member for Reigate as well, for all the hard work that he has done. I think it should not be ignored in this today in this House. My constituents Darren and Danielle Gibson and their 8-year-old daughter Sophia went to Holland to receive the drugs, and it was very important that they did so, and they had a clear beneficial medical benefit for that child. The Minister will know the importance.
I express the cautious hope. It would probably be unrealistic of me to say it with enormous confidence that the honourable gentleman, the member for Strangford, whom we all love dearly, is approaching his peroration, at the end of which there will be an unmistakable question mark. Mr. Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, certainly will. I met the Permanent Secretary, and the Permanent Secretary said to me that he would have some difficulties giving the go-ahead in Northern Ireland. He needs direction from the Home Secretary. Can I ask the Home Secretary what discussions he had with the Permanent Secretary of the Health Department in Northern Ireland to facilitate this urgently for Sophia Gibson, my constituent?
Well, the honourable gentleman will know that in Northern Ireland the decision to issue a possession licence is completely devolved, so it's outside the Home Office's area. That said, we want to work closely with Northern Ireland. My Permanent Secretary, my department, has been working with the Permanent Secretary in the Health Department in Northern Ireland, and we want to help in every way possible, especially in the case of Sophia Gibson, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Alan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I have to say I'm a little bit perplexed by this. The Cabinet the Minister's now saying cannabis. There are currently no legally recognised medicinal or therapeutic benefits. And I'm wondering why, or what it is we're giving to Billy Caldwell, which is in such a turnaround in his situation, and what it is we're proposing to give to Alfie Dingley if it's got no therapeutic benefit.
Mr. Speaker, under the current rules, it's not recognised. And to be a bit clear on that, is that all drugs that may or may not have a medicinal benefit are scheduled. They're scheduled drugs. And if you're in Schedule 1, which is where cannabis is at the moment, that under the law means that it doesn't recognise medicinal benefits. That said, of course, we want to look at the evidence. We want to be led by evidence and the clinicians, and that's exactly why I'm announcing what I've said today, and also exactly why I took action last week.
Thank you. Point of order, Sir Desmond Swain.
Where is everybody, Mr. Speaker? I hope in the light of the extraordinary accusations of the Honourable Member for North Norfolk, they're not behind the bike sheds having a spliff.
That is a most unworthy thought.